Ostia is of note to Wheeler for several reasons. Let's start with the Forum. When you look at the plan first, it's hard to link Ostia with the Roman civic idea. On closer inspection however, the city does have a Decumanus Maximus that bisects it, marked A, on Wheeler's plan, but forks at the west end of the city. The Cardo BB on the plan is quite short, since Ostia was a thriving port town that once lay on the south bank of the river Tiber. In plan however, Ostia looks somewhat untidy. Indeed, Wheeler himself admits that expansion in Ostia was carried out in an ad hoc fashion. The insulae seem haphazard in most parts of the city, but not when we zoom in on the Forum, marked F on the plan. The existing Forum is elongated, which, Wheeler notes, is typical of the empire. Allowing for this fact however, one can easily trace a blueprint of the original castrum, military fort from which Ostia sprang. Like so many other Roman cities, Ostia began life as a military fort for a garrison. Actually, it was founded for a garrison of 300, sometime after 349 BC, when the Italian coast was being harassed by Greek pirates. The shape of the original castrum is represented by a broken rectangle on Wheeler's plan, but it's nonetheless difficult to see in his black and white picture. Here it is for you on a satellite image. The actual remains of the walls still exist in places. They were incorporated into later buildings, and are thus preserved. The lines of the castrum walls enclose a rectangular area of 5.5 acres. The Forum lay at its center and was accessed in all four directions by the two main streets, the Cardo, which led from the river to the north and onto the coast road to the south, and the Decumanus Maximus which linked Ostia with Rome to the east and the sea, to the west. These walls once stood 20 feet high. They were constructed of unmortared tufa, a local limestone in plentiful supply. It is obvious, when looking at the evidence at Ostia, that the city was once a thriving port. Today, the Tiber, marked G on Wheeler's plan, meanders off to the north at Ostia, but the ancient course of the river runs adjacent to the city. This ancient shoreline is marked H on Wheeler's map. The ancient river bank, which silted up and eventually altered the course of the river, is still clearly visible in the contours of the surrounding land and the geophysical makeup of the soil. Remains of wharves and mooring blocks were also discovered north of the Forum, proving that Ostia was once a harbor on the river. Horia warehouses line the Cardo Maxima that led from this ancient harbor through to the Forum, from which the Cardo arcs off into the surrounding countryside to the south. The Decumanus Maximus is the continuation of an ancient highway, Via Ostiensis, that connected Rome to Ostia. The city was thus a vital staging post in Rome's international trade system. The silty Tiber with its meandering course, fast-flowing current and hidden sandbars, was far too treacherous a route for heavy sea-going vessels. Grain ships from Egypt, for instance, would land at Ostia, where their precious cargo was offloaded, weighed, logged and warehoused, before being transported by wagon along the highway to the Forum Boarium in Rome. Wheeler also notes the various buildings that occupy the Forum at Ostia. It is dominated by the imposing Capitolium or Temple to Capitoline Jupiter at its north end. The ruin today is an imposing edifice, but the brick temple is simple. Surmounting a high podium, the Tuscan-style temple cella is accessed by what was once a hexa-style porch, accessed by the typical Roman grand staircase. Wheeler uses it as an early example of a typical Roman frontal temple. The Forum was elongated in the time of Augustus to incorporate a temple at the southern end dedicated to the deified Augustus and the goddess Roma. A small circular shrine to Vesta occupies the center of the Forum. The western side of the Forum was the administrative side. The Curia or town hall was located west of the Capitolium, and below that, at the southwestern corner, we find the Basilica or courthouse. Directly across from the Basilica we find one of the three thermae or public baths in the city. All are marked D on Wheeler's plan. We even find public latrines, toilets, on the Forum, across the Decumanus from the baths. Wheeler notes that aside from the Forum, the only other place where Ostia seems to obey any kind of set civic planning is in the vicinity of the Greek theatre. The cavea or seating area of the theatre, marked T on the plan, is supported by arcades that back directly onto the Decumanus Maximus, whilst directly behind the skene or backdrop of the theatre lies the shipping offices in the place of the guilds. A temple of Ceres stands in the middle of a square park here. The park is enclosed by the offices of merchants. Monochrome mosaics in the path outside each office advertise the provenance of these merchants. They would appear to have been mainly Greeks from Alexandria. Perhaps they were descendants from the original pirates, because of whom Ostia was founded? Regardless of their ancestry however, these Greek merchants seem to have thrived at Ostia. They were no doubt the builders of the Greek theatre, which dates to the 2nd century BC. The nearby barracks of the Vigiles or Night's Watch, marked C on the plan, was erected during the reign of Augustus. It's fitting, don't you think, that such a thriving dockland should have its own fire service cum security force? Wheeler also notes the strange lack of slums at Ostia. In his section on housing, he notes that it was still possible to find 5 or even 6-storied insulae or apartment blocks at Ostia. These high tenement blocks still fell within the law. Owing to the likelihood of fire in Rome, Augustus had limited the height of these blocks to 70 feet and Trajan later shrunk them to 60 feet. The ground and first floors were usually constructed of brick and concrete, and survive today. These were luxurious apartments occupied by the middle classes. They were simple in plan, often no more than a single large room, such as the House of the Painted Vault, which boasts exquisite 4th-style frescoes. It's not marked on Wheeler's plan, but here it is. These blocks had no sanitation or heating flues in the walls. A typical tenement block at Ostia is the House of Diana. Again, not marked, but here it is. Its ground floor was leased to merchants and tradesmen. Like in city buildings today, you would find the ground floor occupied by thermopolia or fast food joints and tabernae, which were either shops or restaurants. But nestled seamlessly in between 2 shops, along the street, you would find the archway that led to the rear of the block. Here a vomitorium or access passage would lead to the upper stories, where corridors at the rear serviced 3 large rooms that opened onto the street and terminated in a 4th. The House of Diana is also interesting because it features non-functional balconies overlooking the street, but they do not match the level of the apartments. The balconies seem to have been purely for show. They made the House of Diana seem more sophisticated than it actually was, which of course, drove the cost of rent up. The upper levels of these apartment blocks, however, which do not survive, would have been made from timber. They were often smaller, hotter, were much cheaper to rent as a result, and thus, occupied by poor plebs. The Tiber is a silty river, which means over the centuries it has changed its course several times. With each passing year, the river sheds its silt load along its banks. Ostia needed constant maintenance to dredge the river banks and keep the harbor operational. The city peaked under the reign of the dictator Sulla when the city walls were built. Around 80 BC. At that time it covered an area of 160 acres. It began to decline after Emperor Claudius began an ambitious project to build a new, purpose-built harbor at nearby Portus, in the 1st century AD. Emperor Trajan completed the town with a deep, artificial, hexagonal lake, linked to Rome by a canal, into which ships could sail and moor along 5 of its waiting docks. After that, Ostia fell out of use as a port. By the 4th century AD, it had become a coastal resort for well-to-do Romans. Again? In his section on housing, Wheeler notes that the house of Amma and Psyche, which dates to this time, seems to have been a kind of holiday home. A luxurious retreat from the humdrum life of Rome. Even today, a 30-minute train journey from Ostia station near the Pyramid metro stop will take you away from the noise and pollution of modern Rome, to the deserted, tranquil streets of the abandoned city of Ostia Antica. It is important to note, that unlike Paestum, a Greek city turned Roman, or Pompeii, a Romanized Oscan wall market, Ostia was always Roman. Starting off as a military fort, it developed into a bustling port, and only later settled into a residential city. Wheeler notes that Ostia's development was haphazard at best, and that there was never more than a rudimentary civic idea at work behind its planning. Ostia developed and peaked in the Republic, however. In Vitruvius's time, the early empire under Augustus, town planning became much more regimented. The original castrum of Ostia was slowly swallowed up by a haphazard urban sprawl, but when we move away up to northern Italy, to the town of Uster, we find the city that never forgot its military origins.